This video explores two fundamental laws from the teachings of George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, crucial principles for learning how to act productively and effectively. Few people genuinely seek knowledge, yet such knowledge is essential for a self-determined life, one in which a person can act consciously and intentionally rather than mechanically, as most humans do. Only through the acquisition of this knowledge and the awareness that follows can the world have a real chance to improve. Knowledge, in this context, refers to the possession of those universal laws that govern the formation, preservation, and destruction of life on this planet. These laws are constantly at work across the four kingdoms of nature: mineral, plant, animal, and human. There are countless universal laws that humanity should come to know, but in this video we'll focus on two in particular: the law of three and the law of seven. Understanding the law of three is essential in order to break free from the slavery of chance and become skilled in steering the ship of our own lives. In other words, it allows us to take full control of our destiny and live with greater awareness and intention. Imagine a world in which everything, from the smallest action to the grandest events, is governed by invisible yet powerful laws that orchestrate the dance of change. In this scenario, two laws emerge that go beyond mere theory: the law of three and the law of seven. These are fundamental forces, universal mechanisms, as constant and evident as gravity itself. Before we continue, I'll take just a moment to remind you to leave a like if you're enjoying the video. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel and you enjoy this kind of content, consider doing so. Thank you very much. And now, let's get back to the video. I wish you a great viewing experience. The law of three is based on a fascinating principle. Everything exists and comes into being only when three forces work together in delicate balance. The first is the creative force, which Gurdjieff called active or affirmative, a powerful, unstoppable impulse toward the new, toward change and birth. Think of a seed, small and silent, harboring within it an entire tree. This force drives it to grow, to make space in the world. But there is also a second force, the conservative force, which Gurdjieff referred to as passive or negative. This force pushes in the opposite direction. It is not destructive, as one might think, but rather aims to preserve what already exists. Its presence is essential for preventing chaos and maintaining the harmony of what is stable. Picture the seed growing in a dense forest. As it transforms into a tall tree, it alters the environment around it, which reacts in turn. This is the conservative force pushing back, trying to maintain equilibrium. Yet the negative force is not evil or hostile. On the contrary, it is necessary for the process of growth. Without resistance, the seed would not develop the strength needed to overcome obstacles and adapt to its environment. It is precisely because of this conservative force that evolution occurs in a balanced way, avoiding chaotic or uncontrolled expansion. Another example might be the impulse that brings a new idea into a person's mind. The positive force is what pushes for expansion and the development of that idea. The second force, the negative force, does not seek to destroy. It acts in the opposite direction to maintain order. In society, this may appear as resistance or opposition to our idea, but that's not actually the case. It is not about stopping creation, but about preserving the equilibrium of the surrounding environment. For instance, when a new idea is introduced into a company, the pre-existing system naturally resists in order to maintain its current functioning. The negative force acts to stabilize what already exists, seeking to protect the context from changes that are too sudden. Once again, this is a self-preservation mechanism. In the realm of human ideas, this phenomenon can be observed very clearly. Every society follows a certain orientation and maintains an internal order. This balance is sustained by a mechanism of conservation that prevents the destruction of what has already been achieved. When new ideas enter a social system, they bring with them a vital impulse that seeks to expand. This is the positive force, which naturally pushes to reorganize existing ideas, those that make up the rules and structure of society. In response to these new ideas, a conservative resistance arises, the negative force that opposes this innovative push. The positive force thus collides with the conservative energy the social system has developed, creating a contrast between innovation and the defense of the status quo. We can clearly observe within ourselves the struggle between these two opposing forces. On one side, desires or needs emerge, accompanied by emotional energy. This represents the positive force, which drives change and creation. On the other side, fears, conditionings, and old habits are activated, forming the negative force. The latter represents resistance, which tends to preserve what is already established, reacting automatically to maintain the existing balance. The contrast between these two forces often results in a state of blockage, which favors the current state of things and makes any attempt at change difficult. For example, we might recognize a harmful habit and decide to change it. This intention belongs to the positive force, which pushes us to seek improvement. However, the ingrained habit exerts its own energy, accumulated over time, which represents the negative force. This resistance prevents the new behavior from easily taking hold. It's like a seed trying to sprout in a forest, suffocated by the tall, established trees around it. Over time, the push for change weakens, and the negative habit remains dominant, completely stifling the potential for transformation. The clash between the two forces almost always favors the conservative one, which represents the tendency toward preservation. From a human perspective, this tendency manifests in the form of habits, conditionings, and a natural resistance to change. This is why those who oppose social transformations are labeled conservatives. In truth, this inclination exists in everyone, as we all respond to a natural law that protects what has already been built. It's not a conscious choice, but rather an automatic response to a universal force. It becomes clear, then, why human beings struggle to exert real power over change. Every time we attempt to introduce something new, something different from our established habits or from the role we play in society, the negative force manifests as an obstacle. This occurs both internally through fears and conditioning and externally through the reactions of others and the social environment in which we live. In nature, there exists a third force that enables the realization of what would otherwise seem impossible. Gurdjieff called it the neutralizing or reconciling force, while others refer to it as the unifying force. This energy operates by resolving the conflict between the force that pushes for change, positive force, and the one that resists it, negative force, thus promoting evolution. For this reason, in nature, nothing remains static. Everything is subject to transformation. For the seed, this unifying force is represented by the nutrients it receives, such as sunlight, water, and minerals dissolved in the soil. Without the contribution of these elements, the genetic energy pushing the seed to grow would not be sufficient. If the positive force, the one stimulating growth, is missing, the seed will not be able to grow, even with the support of the third force. If the seed itself is defective from the start, development is impossible. Likewise, without the negative force, the process would be chaotic, as there would be no stabilizing energy to protect and preserve material forms. This is why resistance is always present, even psychologically in the human being. The effects of the three forces maintain a balance that is difficult to perceive at a superficial glance. Only the observation of a sharp and trained mind can recognize its real and magnificent functioning. This balance pertains to the general order, the cosmic order. As for our lives, the lack of knowledge and mastery of these laws leaves us, as mentioned, at the mercy of chance. Thus, if chance moves events in our favor, our life benefits. Otherwise, we may become victims of a life filled with suffering and frustration. And that, unfortunately, is the situation most of humanity finds itself in. Let's return to the example of the seed. The positive force pushes it toward the future, while sunlight and nutrients act as the unifying force. Both must work together for the seed to overcome the resistance of the surrounding environment, represented by the negative force. This law is a universal principle, present throughout nature, and it cannot be altered by humans. It is an immutable constant, like the rising of the sun. However, we can learn to understand it and use it to gain a greater degree of freedom otherwise inaccessible. It's important to recognize that reality is more complex than it appears, as it depends on a vast array of variables. If we think of the seed pushed by the positive force to germinate, we realize that its environment may hinder this process. Tall grass, already developed plants, or pests may suffocate it. The seed draws nutrients from the soil, but it also needs light and water to survive. These elements, which represent the unifying force, allow the seed to face the challenges posed by the environment. But if a drought arrives, or the seed doesn't receive enough light, its development will be blocked. Similarly, excessive sunlight or torrential rains could cause the seed to die. For this reason, we say that only one seed in 1,000 succeeds in growing under natural conditions. Development requires a perfect balance among the three forces. If even one is missing, nothing can evolve. From the seed's perspective, the harmonious combination of the three forces is merely a matter of luck. In other words, the seed is subject to the law of accident, a principle that governs every aspect of nature, including the human being. It is accident that explains how, even when growing up in the same family and environment, two people can have completely different destinies, one successful, the other not. Although we may not like to admit it, much of our life is determined by accident, within which the law of three also operates. Sometimes in a person's life, the three forces align naturally, allowing them to achieve unexpected success. This can lead to the mistaken belief that we have full control over every aspect of our existence. In reality, if we had been taught the law of three and the law of accident, we would have understood that our destiny largely depends on how these forces manifest. Many people live alternating between moments of fortune and misfortune, attributing such fluctuations to external forces like talismans or rituals. If we only truly understood these universal laws and applied them wisely, we could free ourselves from these illusions, as well as from those who sell them. We could finally take control of our lives, confronting the law of accident with greater awareness. Because it will continue to influence us, whether we are conscious of it or not. However, if we learn to understand and apply the universal laws, such as the law of three, which governs the dynamics of forces, and the law of seven, which regulates rhythm and deviations in processes, we could align ourselves with them in an intelligent way. This way, instead of being slaves to random events, we would become co-creators of our own destiny, using these laws as tools to achieve our goals. At this point, let us explore how the principle